Right, this is going to be a fairly quick lesson. We're just going to have a look at the second Chartist disturbance of the period. We've already gone over the Newport Rising of 1839 now. In this lesson, we're going to go over the Plug Plot of 1842. So, the Plug Plot and the rejection of the 1842 petition. The Plug Plot of 1842 was the second mass mobilization of the period for the Chartists between 1839 and 1848. Similar to the Newport Rising, the Plug Plot ensued following the rejection of the second national Chartist petition by Parliament. So Parliament essentially rejected their petition. This petition was rejected in May of 1842, which resulted in a wave of rioting throughout Britain. The Plug Plot was ultimately suppressed by the Peelites, so they're the new police introduced by Prime Minister Robert Peel, so the first Liberal Prime Minister, really, or Conservative, depending on your opinion. I'd probably say Conservative. And the Peelites were essentially a result of his 9 principles of the Metropolitan Police Force, and obviously they replaced the Bow Street Runners, whom had played a role in suppressing some of the disturbances earlier in the period, such as the Cato Street conspiracy. And obviously it was also suppressed by the military. So in the exam, you can say that they were dealt with effectively by the government in the sense that they were suppressed, but the government didn't really do anything to remedy the cause of the protest, so you could use that as a criticism of the government response and say, actually, they didn't deal with it that well, as they didn't deal with the grievances the public had, like the government did with the Rebecca riots, where they actually addressed it and the protest stopped almost immediately. So, roughly 500,000 workers participated in a series of riots that took place in the industrial districts of the North and the Midlands between July and August of 1842. The miners of North Staffordshire struck in July, and this was followed by the Lancashire textile workers. These strikes were a result of wage cuts, thus establishing that the riots were partially a knife and fork issue, because they've been driven by economic distress of factory workers from the wage cuts. So you can argue that they were although they ensued following the rejection of the second Chartist petition, you can say that the factory workers only really wanted Chartism as they saw it as a way of alleviating their economic suffering, because obviously they didn't have much money, so it wasn't really a politically motivated movement. The workers were only participating in Chartism to alleviate their suffering. It wasn't really due to any kind of political consensus or working class consciousness, as E.P. Thompson may suggest. But anyway, mobs of strikers roamed Britain and forced a general stoppage in the production via drawing out the plugs of factory boilers, thus making them useless. The strike rapidly spread across the pennies into Yorkshire and even into Scotland. By September, 15 English and Welsh counties and 8 Scottish counties were affected. And obviously this was not good for the Conservatives, as the counties were their safe seat, so they don't want to be antagonising the public by not doing anything. So, Chartist involvement in the Plug Plot. Historians debate whether or not the strikes were politically motivated. Although the strikers adopted the implementation of the People's Charter as one of their aims, it is unclear whether or not this was done as a matter of expediency in a hope that it would alleviate their suffering. Thomas Cooper, a participant in the Plug Plot, wrote in his memoirs that the strikes began in a response to wage cuts. strikes, and then the strikers adopted the policy that all labour should cease until the People's Charter is made law. So obviously the plug plot started off as a response to the wage cuts, and then they adopted the People's Charter after the plug plot had already started. So with regards to that, you can kind of say that the Chartists were being politically expedient by putting a Chartist spin on the plug plot, because obviously it wasn't an intention of the initial strikers. The historian Max Beer argues that Chartist participation in the plug plot was immense and that armed opposition was the only way to achieve their goals. Beer's view is similar to the one held by Peel's government, as the government made it clear that it blamed the Chartists by arresting 1,000 of them. Other historians, such as Belcham, argue that Chartist involvement in the plot was opportunistic and insignificant due to the fact that the Chartists had no real plan and were just reacting to what was happening. This second interpretation is supported by the fact that Chartist participation in the plug plot was patchy, and the fact that the charter was only brought up by some of the strikers after the strike had begun. Now, I personally agree with Belcham's view more than the one espoused by Beer, but obviously to each their own. That pretty much sums up the plug plot. We're going to be going over the Kennington Common fiasco in a future lesson, if you just saw that sneak peek of the front cover there. Anyway, that's it for the plug plot of 1842.